If you're a fan of horror films like me, this 2024 was such a great year. And I think it's been perfectly capped off with the likes of The Substance, Smile 2, and Terrifier 3. But one of my favorites this year has to be Longlegs, and I've been itching to recreate a scene from that film. Now, right off the bat, I knew I wouldn't be able to pull off a shot by shot recreation. I don't have the budget or the resources for that, but I definitely wanted to capture the creepy atmosphere of the film, so that meant crafting great visuals and focusing on sound design that would keep the viewer on edge. And as I slowly built this project up, it eventually morphed into its own little thing. I also wanted to show what you can accomplish with a one-man team, 1 week, and very limited resources. So join me as I take you through what I learned from recreating the scene, what I did to make some uncinematic shots more cinematic, and how I built up tension through carefully setting up my scene and subverting expectations. If you're new to the channel, my name's John, and a few weeks back I made a short horror film called Knock Knock Knock, an homage to Longlegs and my love letter to the horror genre. Something I hold near and dear to me as I grew up watching a lot of horror shows and films, and looking back, I think it's the main reason why I got into filmmaking in the first place. So the scene that I chose to adapt was a scene when Agent Lee Harker comes home from her investigation into the birthday murders, and we can break this down into three parts: the setup, the build-up, and the release. The setup begins with her arriving at her home, and immediately we get a sense of how alone and isolated she is. She does, however, hear a mysterious sound which makes us anticipate that something bad could happen here. This setup is brief, but it informs the rest of the scene because it allows us to think twice about how safe she actually is in the confines of her house. Then, the build-up. We begin with the phone conversation with her mom, giving us a little bit of room to breathe, allowing us to feel safe. But here we get a shot of her which makes us think, is there something suddenly going to appear behind her, playing with our expectations for a horror film? There's a slow buildup of tension here, and that begins to rise when she hears a mysterious whisper, followed by a knock at the door, which she investigates. The tension rises further when we finally get confirmation that there is a stranger watching her. Agent Harker goes into a fight or flight response. In this case, it's a fight because she is, after all, an FBI agent. Tension escalates further when she realizes that the stranger has entered her house. Finally, the release. She enters, and we're all anticipating a jump scare, but our expectations are subverted as Agent Harker instead discovers a present on her desk. This is great because although the tension is released and we finally get to breathe again, our subconscious knows that no, this isn't over yet, and the string of tension in the overarching storyline is pulled even tighter. So, having studied the scene, I immediately went to writing a simple script. I have my setup where I create a sense of isolation for my character, then the build-up with a knock on the door, mysterious flashes and discovery of the camera, and finally, the release where we find out who or what exactly is causing all of this. Now, I don't want to go into a long conversation on the cinematic look. That could be a whole different video, but to make things short, even though the camera and the lens choice plays a big hand, to an even bigger extent, it's everything else that you put in your shot. The lighting, the colors, the composition, costumes, production design, the way the camera moves, all of that plays into the cinematic look. In this project, what I chose to emphasize and work on was the use of the contrast in light and shadows and the colors to help give my shots a sense of depth. But also, let me show you a few examples where I didn't have much control with my shots and I had to do a little bit of post-editing magic to help my shots get closer to that cinematic feel we all love. Let's start off first with the very first shot I took, and it was this hallway shot. Now, I really hated this shot when I started out because I hate this hallway. I hate the color combination in the walls, the lighting isn't great, but the uniformity in the segments of the hallway really allow for some awesome leading lines, which I wanted to use. So, as an experiment, I tried playing around with the exposure of the different parts of the hallway to create depth in the lights and the shadows, adding a little bit of camera blur in the foreground, and I ended up with this shot, which made me think this hallway isn't so bad. Next is the second shot I took, which is the opening shot, and I lucked out because one night while walking outside, I happened to look up and saw the moon just at the peak of this building. And I figured I could try and edit it to create a similar shot to the silhouette of trees in the beginning of the Longlegs scene. Now this took a little bit more finessing, but I simply masked out the other buildings, removed the lights on the windows by masking a copy of an unlit area and putting that on top, and adding a yellow light at the center with a subtle bloom. I then put back the sky in the background and the moon right behind the building, gave the building a bluish tone to contrast the yellow light, and then when I finally put down the final color grade, it gave the structure an ominous, foreboding quality which I felt was perfect to open the short film with. Next, and this is the third shot I took, it's the doorway shot. I started off with some good framing and minimal lighting, and since I couldn't figure out a good way to motivate the light so that there would be a good contrast, here I decided to use colors in my costume in order to create that same effect, wearing a green jacket to slightly offset the yellow in the lighting. Initially, I ended up my edit with this shot, but after looking at it again on the next day, I felt something was missing. So I decided to copy a part of the other side of the wall to cover up my little kitchen, try to make it as clean as I could, and I felt this really upped the visuals by a big margin because of the symmetry, making the shot more striking as a whole. But at the same time, it still gave it an unnatural quality and a subtle feeling of uneasiness that the viewer might not be able to quite put their finger on. And these first 3 frames really were my starting point for all my other shots and colors and the overall mood and tone for the short film. So I made sure to refer back to them regularly as I was working on my project. Now, the main reason why I decided to do this short film was to learn how to create an eerie atmosphere and really build and hold tension. Looking back at a lot of my previous attempts at horror, I realized that they didn't have that strong sense of build-up and anticipation. And I mainly forced the atmosphere through the use of ominous music and some cheap jump scares. So this was a scene we made in film school a few years back, and even the lighting here could have been improved a lot. So learning my lesson, I made sure to play around with the lights and the shadows so that the viewer can feel a sense of dread in anticipation for something that may or may not appear in the background as the scene unfolds. So even though we get to relax a little bit in this phone conversation, by way of framing and lighting the character, that sense of tension is slowly growing. I also wanted to make sure that my edit could breathe, so I played around with the cuts and tried different timings that would allow the viewer to settle in and feel what my character would be feeling in that same scenario. That's probably why the knocking scene was my favorite part to build up, and that eventually led to the title of the film. I wanted to play with that idea of the knocking at the door, a device that has been used time and time again in a lot of horror films, and maybe give it a fresh take. For me, it was adding in this mysterious flash of light when my character looks through the peephole, which felt like it was the intended jump scare when in reality it's not. A good subversion of expectations right there, but also that sets up a future jump scare as the story progresses. I also love this shot from below because it literally puts the character in a position of vulnerability by way of framing, and when you think that you get to breathe, that's when the jump scare happens. So that was a look into my homage to Longlegs. I really learned a lot from this exercise, and I hope that you guys were able to learn a little something as well, or maybe get some inspiration from some of the shots I was able to pull off. So if you enjoy this, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments below. And yeah, to everyone who watched the short film and gave their feedback, I really appreciate it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!